I'm delighted to have with us today Cyril from the EIF. And together with Cyril, we have Lara Viada from CREAS. Let's kickstart with one question for Cyril. Cyril, you have started this work around tying the compensation of the fund managers in your portfolio. If I remember correctly, it all started from this framework around impact management and impact measurement that you have at EIF. Could you maybe explain to us a bit what was the history and what was the background? Why was this necessary?
Hi, everyone on the call. Pleasure to have this panel with you as well, Lara. So on your question, I would say simply that impact measurement or impact investing without measurement is simply impact washing. So being able to measure impact in a tangible way, as scientific as possible way, is one important element that very much ties into impact investing. But the way we viewed it is that it should not be another reporting tool, because in the impact investing space, and this is something I have shared with already some of you on the call, indeed in previous discussion we had, Laura and Lara, we always view at the heart of impact investing the importance to create accountability across the value chain between the entrepreneurs, the fund manager, and the fund LPs. So in other words, impact investing is not about setting some kind of reporting standard, but is rather around making sure that GPs invest in mission-driven founders and that LPs investing in impact funds can rely on the commitment of the fund manager to incorporate in the investment decision also impact KPIs and impact metrics. I think this is a key frontier that is addressed by impact investing. Incorporate in the due diligence relevant theory of change and impact scorecard, so the entrepreneur and the GP can as such realize or verify during the holding period and the investment journey that the reason why the GP invested in this company in the first place is met. In other words, that the impact objectives are met.
Well, obviously, like Cyril was saying, the most important thing is really that accountability and alignment of incentives, right? That's very obvious. But then to add on what has already been said, I think it also helps to prioritize impact, to put impact first in all of the decisions, and then also to professionalize impact, which is something that Cyril has also said, right? It forces us to establish a very rigorous impact framework that always has sort of the same methodology. And this impact framework at the end of the day is constantly being challenged. Because we have this opportunity to have a conversation around impact on the investments that we make, it helps first this reassurance for LPs. They know that we are really prioritizing impact and taking impact seriously. It also helps to get their feedback. So when we are presenting a company in a certain sector, we generally always learn, hey, there's other companies that are doing this way. I would recommend to include this kind of KPIs. This is the general market standard, right? So that also definitely has helped us be challenged and learn. The other thing is that it also pushes us to move from reporting, like Cyril was saying, from impact just measurement to impact managing, right? Because it's not only about establishing indicators, but also about making sure that you reach the targets that you set at the beginning. So you have to really move to manage this and maximize impact and establish a clear framework. In our case, we generally use an OKR methodology, but really what's the pathway to achieve that impact, right? And then last but not least, I think today, and this has also been mentioned by Cyril, as impact is growing and there are many, many actors coming into the industry, it also has become a key market differentiator for us to demonstrate, I would say, a stronger commitment to impact and avoid that impact washing, right? So it's a very strong signal to the market that we really take impact very seriously. And it's core to our strategy, I would say.
Wow, I think I wrote down so many points. I'll just try to summarize so that we don't lose this very rich information. So starting with the last one, actually, because that's one of the points that I was thinking about. Everyone says is doing the impact investing now because it's so trendy, right? So in a way, when I was thinking and brainstorming about this topic, I was wondering, since everyone thinks they do it, that they are intentional, then they might say, why do I actually need it? It's already in my strategy somehow, right? But you're talking about differentiation on the market. You're talking about leading the way in a way as well, because it's us, the impact community, who are also responsible for setting the limits and showing the way to others, right? Creating the boundaries so that when maybe new professionals in the field come, they need to sort of conform with the standards in the industry. Or when VCs and PE funds want to transform and become more impact driven, they also need to conform to some standards. That's also another role that I think we are all playing. Then you're talking about accountability and how, you're moving from only measurement to managing the impact by having a clearer and more professional framework as well, which also helps learning and helps conversation. I heard you talking about how you get the feedback and you have an opportunity to improve based on this conversation. And probably one of the most important points around the alignment and the prioritization of impact, which is really at the core of this mechanism, right? So, wow, very rich. Thank you so much. Cyril, maybe back to you. I'm curious, we've talked about the positive, let's say, the benefits of having such a framework. Is there any opposition from the funds that you have been talking to? Have you gotten any opposition so far?
Well, depends what you call opposition. So what is for sure is that rarely is this principle ever challenged, meaning we are in the impact investing space, and I, as a GP, as a fund manager, should also be judged and should also be incentivized, not exclusively by the financial performance that I manage to create through the fund I manage, but also through the impact performance of my portfolio. And so on this, we have not faced opposition. I think it's pretty clear for industry players, stakeholders in general, that, and that's also something that where our investment strategy lies on, is that there should be a positive correlation between impact performance and financial performance. So this is not challenged. Now, our methodology in itself, yes, is sometimes challenged, and I think it's healthy. And it's also fair to say that our methodology has evolved compared to where it was in 2013 when you look at it today. And this is simply a good news, and obviously the result of interaction, negotiation with fund managers. This being said, I think that if you count today, if I can drop a few statistics and figures here, more than 40 funds across Europe, whether they are after social impact or environmental impact, do implement this methodology. And obviously, from one fund to another, there may be adaptations of the methodology I just presented earlier, but we are talking about relatively marginal adaptation. The principle that if I want to get the access to the carry and other type of financial incentives, this can only be if next to financial performance, I meet my impact objectives. This principle is fairly well agreed and understood in the market, I would say. And I'd like to mention also that as much as the hurdle rate in a fund is here to align LPs and GP on the financial value creation, the way the targets are set on the impact indicators should not be equivalent to some kind of impact hurdle. The purpose is not the same. The purpose is to make sure that each and every time when a GP invests in a company, the impact due diligence has been done. There is a clear roadmap towards putting the impact at scale and as meaningful as possible. So the purpose of this methodology is different from the purpose of the hurdle rate. I'd like to stress this point because it is simply the targets that are assigned to an indicator, impact indicator, is a validation of the theory of change. It's not some kind of success around the intensity of impact delivered, to summarize.
Yeah, it's a very important point. It's really baking it as an ingredient in the formula rather than how much of it you put in. And Lara, back to you. Will you care to maybe share with us how you actually implemented the mechanism at CREAS? How does it work in practice for you? Because I think people are very curious to see what they can take from today's conversation and go back home and try to discuss with their own members.
Yes, of course. So I guess it all starts with the first conversations that we have with potential investees, where we generally start working on what we call an impact plan, rather just impact measurement, with this philosophy of it goes beyond just the indicators, right? And on that impact plan, obviously we start defining what's the theory of change of the company. Obviously, it's a company that has already been pre-screened as impact, but we really have to define it with a lot of detail. Then we generally use the IMP methodology to understand the 5 dimensions of impact. And that boils down to defining a set of indicators that will be aligned with the theory of change, right? On these indicators, we generally establish some scale indicators, so output indicators on the more jerga, and then some change indicators, some outcome indicators, right? The scale indicators they have to be linked to the company's business plan, to the plan where we've invested, right? So that we make sure that they are ambitious indicators, right? And that gives us a sense of how many lives are we changing with how much depth, as to say, right? This impact plan not only has the indicators, but then goes into detail of what kind of activities are you going to establish to ensure that these indicators get achieve what we're trying to achieve, right? And then also we go into some governance details. How are you going to align your own employees' incentives to these impact indicators? Probably not on short-term incentives like bonuses, but on ESOPs, we do generally tie impact indicators. How are you as a CEO going to be aligned to these indicators also? How are we going to establish some impact clauses on our own investments, on our shareholders agreement? Well, another kind of how are you going to ensure that these indicators are spoken about on boards and prioritized on boards? Because many times we co-invest in many companies with traditional investors, right? And I also think, like you were saying, Laura, before, that one of our roles is to be sort of a pioneer and leader in the industry, right? So we try to make sure that there's a way to convince other more conventional investors that putting impact has a value, a long-term value, right? We're currently now talking a lot about how impact creates the impact alpha, right? So how impact can help create long-term value in the company in many different areas, from strategy to people to attracting capital to many areas, right? So that's where it starts. And then we measure the percentage achievement of this. As I was saying before, these indicators then have to be approved by our supervisory committee. And then we measure the percentage achievement of these indicators, which becomes the social impact multiple. And we report this quarterly in our investor report. Generally, you always see, we generally measure these indicators towards the 4-year goal that we've established, right? Even though there's intermediary goals, like Cyril was showing, we try to measure this as a goal. And I also forgot to say that the indicators are also consolidated because each indicator has a certain weight, like Cyril was showing, and then they're also consolidated at a portfolio level, depending on the amount invested by the fund, right? So that gives us the fund's social impact indicator. In our case, for example, right now we're at a 67%.
That's what I wanted to ask. So basically, it's a number that keeps on growing. It's a percentage that keeps on growing if things go well. Exactly. Depending on the weight and on the scale versus outcome indicators, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we've also started to differentiate when we report to our investors how our outcome indicators going and how our scale indicators going, right? Because outcome indicators can start more near 100%, although not always, but sometimes from the beginning. But scale indicators, as it generally, you can imagine, they grow over time, right? And then how does this link to our carried? So for CREAS, if we are below 60% of the social impact multiple, we would not get any carried interest, even if we do great in financial results. If this social impact multiple is between 60 and 80%, it would be proportionate, right? So 60%, we would only get half of the social impact multiple, and then 80% the full carried interest. And above 80%, we would then get the total carried interest that we've established, which in our case is 20%, a general carried interest, right?
I'm curious because, again, different literature talks about linking carry, maybe not entirely, but only a part of it. So maybe back to you, Cyril, what was the rationale behind? Why did you actually go for, the whole piece?
In your question earlier, you asked whether we're buying in or building in some flexibility on our methodology, and this is one of the elements where we can openly discuss whether it is 100% of the carry or half of the carry that should be made subject to impact achievement. We do not have a one-size-fits-all type of approach, so definitely I cannot answer your question, Laura, on how much of the carry should be made subject to. I think, again, I'd say that if a fund manager is confident on how the impact measurement methodology works first, and second on its impact investing strategy as a whole, altogether, then that should pave the way for, indexing the whole carry to not only financial performance, but also impact performance. And that's, again, simply putting into practice the assumption that in the impact investing space, there is a positive correlation between financial performance and impact performance. This being said, and that is why we do not want to take some kind of one-size-fits-all type of approach, but we consider that for some strategies, like half of the carried interest being subject to is a good way forward. But again, same as for instance, as Lara was explaining earlier, what matters is that there is some kind of frame defined. The indicators should be company specific, same as this methodology. If we want it to run smoothly, it should never be like a LP strong arming the GP. If we want this methodology to work properly, there should be also some acceptance of the fund manager's view and adaptation to this methodology. For this reason, we can accept a different setups. I would say anything between half and 100% is in general a good way forward, and to decide where we precisely set the needle or move the needle depends very much on the specificities of the strategy of the GP.
Mm-hmm. Is it linked probably also with the impact intentionality? The higher that is, the higher the...
That's one of the elements, definitely. Intentionality in the impact space. And again, as you mentioned, Lara, and that you know very well, intentionality is not at all a trivial element. It's something major, both in the business model of the company and in the investment strategy of the GP.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting how we also leave the conversation open for a next one with new developments and new trends. Thank you so much, everyone. If there are questions that you want to pick up with one of the speakers, don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we take the liberty to connect you maybe with Cyril and Lara. And then I'm passing over to Luis maybe for some final wording.
Thanks for the interesting conversation and for making it an interactive one today. Really looking forward to continuing that at a later stage. There will be opportunities coming in 2022 for sure to stay in touch on this topic. Thank you, everyone.